I worked in a psychiatric medical institute for children. One girl, around 13, had been pimped out by her mother and abused by several men. One night at bedtime routines, she hadn't come out of the shower yet and had locked herself in. When she finally opened the door, she had bit into her hand, and her veins and tendons were showing. She kept moving her hand to watch them move. Craziest thing was that once she was transported to the hospital, her mother made jokes about how her daughter just wanted to see what it tasted like. This girl basically turned into a celebrity around the campus because all the other children thought she was edgy for what she had done. By far, the most heartbreaking things for me usually involved repetitive movements and the person being nonverbal. Let me explain. I was helping cover night shift for a residential treatment center. As I'm doing room checks, I hear this repetitive banging sound coming from the room at the farthest end of the hall. Go down there as quickly as I can, and see the girl laying face down, raising her upper body up off of the pillow and slamming back down on the bed over and over and over again. All while she was asleep. When I grabbed another staff, they just kind of shrugged and said, "Yeah, she does that like every night." It's sad, isn't it? Turns out it's a thing called RMD, and can sometimes happen in kids for a variety of reasons, but hers was definitely mental health and trauma related. Also, had another teenage girl get brought in right after a guy had picked her up, gotten her high on bath salts, and sexually assaulted her. I saw her sitting in a chair, completely nonverbal with an absolute blank expression on her face, bruises and cuts on her neck and legs, just rocking back and forth and twisting and pulling her hair to the point it was all just a giant knot. I can handle screaming, sobbing, fighting, all of that. But when you see someone who is completely non-responsive just doing the same movements over and over again, you feel completely at a loss. As a psychologist, I sometimes pick up hours at local clinics, weekends mostly. I specialize in children and family issues. A family came in randomly with their 5-year-old son. He had not spoken in a month. Not a word. A month ago, this poor child watched as his 6-year-old brother drowned in the family pool. The parents were unaware that both kids had gone outside. Unbelievable trauma. The 5-year-old had a 1,000-yard stare. Parents were crushed. We had a nonverbal extremely low IQ client who would self-soothe by sticking their finger between their eyeball and their eye socket, and rub the side of their eyeball. Our assumption is that they have an extremely high pain tolerance, and the stimulation may have actually felt good to them. Had a patient when I was in my psychiatry rotation in medical school, who had said that he had killed 2 people when he was in a gang 15 years ago, and was now hearing the voice of God telling to hurt himself as punishment. He kept darting his eyes around the room. Definitely creeped me out during the patient interview. Not a mental health worker but a camp counselor at a camp for underprivileged kids. We had a camper who would blind rage. He would be completely normal, then randomly would effing snap. The very last day of camp, he was just waiting in line for something, when someone threw a rock and hit the kid who had blind rage directly in the eye, causing him to bleed from his eye. I have never heard a worse scream in my entire life. He then starts running towards the kid who hit him in the eye. It effing took 4 staff to get this 10-year-old to not effing kill another kid. While working in a jail, I was called down to someone's cell to assess him for homicidal ideations. When I got there, he had carved pieces of his legs out, and stated he was a follower of Satan, whom told him he needed to release some spirits from his body. He had a long history of self-harm, including swallowing glass. He had a high threshold for pain. Jail was not a place he should have been at, but unfortunately mental health funding is one of the first to go when there are budget cuts. I work in the forensic side of mental health. Where do I begin? PT. Was drunk and was physically assaulted by her boyfriend. Upon arriving at the hospital is hysterical and tells nurse she was sexually assaulted in the back of the ambulance. Medic denies it. During the investigation, both are asked to take lie detector tests. He passes. She fails and tries to commit suicide, saying the police had been horrible to her and accused her of lying for attention. She now has brain damage. DNA results come back. She was telling the truth. Another story. Woman claims her coworkers at a fast food restaurant are controlling her mind with their iPods. They aren't really coworkers, they are secret military police. They make her black out and gang rape her. She gets pregnant and gives birth under their control, and they take the baby and start raping her too. Every night she can hear her daughter begging for help but cannot get to her. She starts calling 911 saying her daughter is being raped and ends up making dozens of calls before she is arrested for misusing 911. She never had a daughter. She refused to believe this and kept screaming at us to go find the bloody sheets in her closet as proof. There were no sheets. I've never seen a human being as scared as she was before that day. But none of it was real. The third story. Young guy in his early 20s. Found guilty of raping several children from infancy to 10 years old. Admitted that he started molesting kids when he was a teenager. Admitted to bestiality. He purposely chose infants or disabled kids because they couldn't tell on him. He had journals where he talked about his crimes and drew cartoons of his assaults. He also wrote about his future plans for assaulting more children and invented torture devices he wanted to build. He had plans and diagrams where he was planning on surgically removing his own penis. This guy was a Hannibal Lecter in the making. After he was found guilty and committed, he started torturing himself. He would try to think of painful sexual things to do to himself, and if he found out he was not the first person to think of that particular way to inflict harm, he would rage out. He was obsessed with finding new ways to hurt people in a sexual way. He violated himself multiple times with a plunger while dunking his head in the toilet. Poop. So much poop. Especially in the hair. The smell lingers for days. I've seen and smelled some poop in my day. I'm not a mental health worker myself, but I do remember one girl I saw while I was put in a psych ward about a year ago or so. In the place I stayed in particular, most of us were there because of self-harm and suicidal tendencies. However, there was one little girl who was somewhere between 8 and 10, who was very different. I was in there a whole 3 days, and every day she would have screaming, thrashing, punching panic attacks to the point where she would have to actually be given shots to force her to sleep. She was a nuisance, as she was violent and would hit people, as well as being mostly mute. But at the same time, I felt bad for her. It takes a lot to make someone, especially at her age, completely lose grip with reality like that. I don't know the full story, or even if this is true, but apparently both of her parents had died. I don't know how, but I know that she had been abused badly by whoever she was living with. She didn't have friends, and I doubt she had been to school for a while, seeing as she had been in the ward for a long time. I think about that a lot. I hope she's living a better life. Don't work in the mental health profession, but I remember when I was in basic combat training, there was a girl in my platoon, who often just stared at us without blinking. She'd open her mouth to speak but would just mumble. She'd sometimes say things about eyes being everywhere, watching her, and I think she refused to eat the food provided, because she was paranoid. She had a weird speech pattern as well. And at night when we were asleep in the female barracks, she was caught wandering around talking to herself and the supposed giant spider she claimed to see crawling on the ceiling. Long story short, she was sent to the psych ward after having a mental breakdown that was triggered by the presence of the drill sergeants. She claimed they looked like demons. Come to find out, she was a paranoid schizophrenic, and they did not even catch that in her mental evaluation, before shipping her to training. Fun fact, did you know that batteries have a distinct smell when the contents react with saliva in your stomach contents? Because they do. Here's how I know. Worked in a mental health facility, girl ate a Duracell AA battery on Christmas. She displayed self-harm, which, to her doctor, was attention-seeking behavior. Basically, a co-worker and I were working on Christmas Eve and were doing med count. This facility was a facility where it's basically assisted living without getting hands-on. This gave them a sense of normalcy and independence to possibly go back out on their own in the real world, if even possible. For those who don't know, med count is when we count meds to make sure the correct doses are there, and they correlate with the appropriate day. So she thought we were avoiding her on purpose. We weren't. We were gearing up to make Christmas cookies with them after med count, so we were trying to get a lot done so they would have fun, and not have to be interrupted by us leaving to go get meds ready. Another resident comes in, not even 5 minutes into my shift, and says the remote is missing batteries and she thinks this girl has them and won't give them back. So I go out, ask for batteries, and the girl doesn't answer. I keep asking and finally get a muffled answer, no. So putting on my metaphorical dad pants, I put on gloves, ask her to come to the office, and sit her down with us and say, "All right girl, spit it out, now." And I hold out my hand. It takes her a minute, but she complies, and out comes what's left of a Duracell AA battery. My coworker almost throws up. She's got black stained lips and they clearly have the start of chemical burns on them. When the battery hits my hand, I immediately feel the heat from the contents eating through the glove, so I take it off and put it in a bag for the paramedics and for evidence for her doctor. My coworker is outside dry heaving still. The metallic smell mixed with burned skin and vomit filled the office and I almost lost it but kept it together. She then says my stomach and mouth hurt really bad. Well yeah, I reply, you just ate a battery. Why would you do something silly like that, girl? If you needed to talk, you have my coworker and I." She shrugged and then asked, "Am I going to be 302D?" For those who don't know, 302 is a code for someone who's involuntary committed basically. I respond with, "Well girl, I'm going to be honest, you're going to hospital. That's not changing, and I'm sorry about that, but it's happening because we don't know why your stomach hurts, so they will check you out. As far as being 302D, that's not what I'm focused on at the moment." At the time I was more focused on the mixture of black sludge she's throwing up mixed with half-digested food. I knew why her stomach hurt, but I needed to calm her down because if anyone knows, telling a patient or resident they will be 302D isn't a good idea at all. She went to hospital and they ended up committing her decision. They regulated her meds and she was back in a week's time. This wasn't the last incident with her, but on Christmas Eve it was way more than I wanted to deal with, to be honest. Needless to say, no one ended up making Christmas cookies. Got stories for days, thanks to a family member who worked as one of 3 mental health first responders in a meth-ravaged city of over 100,000. There's the dude who was found in the park with his hands completely rubbed raw because he was using rocks to remove his fingerprints. Severe paranoia, thought the mob and CIA were after him. The 600-pound lady who had a psychotic episode and thought God told her to reach inside of her cat, managed to fit her giant arm down the cat's throat, but when the cat died she couldn't get the cat off. Someone called the police because of the sound of someone shoving their arm down a live cat. Blood everywhere, and deep scratches. She apparently got her arm in there down to about the elbow. My family member showed up after the cat was removed from her arm, but heard about the scene from more than one officer. He then had to interview this woman after she did that. Crazy stuff. Let's see. Well, there was a time I was in an adolescent psych ward, very happy and stable now, over a decade later, for 2 weeks, and I was depressed and remorseful about a recent suicide attempt, but was otherwise fine. I got roomed with this Russian kid who spoke no English. He was catatonic during the day, and I wasn't in my room unless I had to be, because the guy creeped me out. Dead eyes, disgustingly long nails, smelled bad. He was totally unable to care for himself. We were both maybe 14 to 15. Several times, I woke up in the middle of the night to him standing over my bed, staring at me. Once I woke up to him sprinkling water everywhere in the room, chanting something and using a Bible and the water to bless things. There was a big window between the heads of our beds, and he repeatedly blessed that window by saying something in, what I assume was, Russian in a deep, demonic voice, and then sprinkling water from a bowl he somehow procured. He sounded legitimately possessed. He did this for at least an hour, before eventually starting to sprinkle the water Catholic priest style on me, my bed, etc. And then I noticed the smell of urea. That was pee, not water. Highly dehydrated pee. I waited until he stopped this robotic sprinkling and demonic chanting, and then got up as if I was going to go to the bathroom, but then ran out and called a nurse. There was yellow-orange splatter all over my sheets. And somehow that crap wasn't as terrifying as the sleep paralysis and night terror combo I used to get. But it was wild and gross. Not a worker, but when my sister was checked into a psych ward after a suicide attempt, I went and visited her and got to meet some interesting people. My sister had made some friends there, and one of her friends had hallucinations, auditory and visual. This boy was no older than 16, and his explanation of what he saw was effing horrifying. Basically, he was always surrounded by ninjas who raped him and were always watching him. Now at first it sounds kind of bizarre and maybe even funny, but really think about it. Vanta black, hooded figures were always somewhere in the room watching him, the only visible thing on their bodies were the eyes. He said the ninjas would rape and torture him at random, and if they weren't doing that they'd be in the corners of the room telling him to kill himself. This boy was always looking around, giving blank stares to random places in the room. The most effed up thing is that you'd see him start to tear up and shake, and you just felt so helpless. I hope he finds peace one day, and I think about him a lot.